everybody, and welcome back to the world of Nerdgasm. I am not your regular host. I am the King Kaleb Koho, bringing you a special triple threat edition of Nerdgasm. It's going to be a fun one. 3 debuting players coming to Nerdgasm for the first time, bringing some really cool arguments, and this is going to be a lot of fun. Here to help me debate and judge this debate is the GOAT, Maggie Brzakala. How you doing, Maggie?
I'm good. I'm here last minute. It'll be a fun time. I actually don't know anything about, Star Trek or Community, so you'll actually have to convince me by what you say. So,
okay. Absolutely. And we had Jay Burns, and he has now left the building, so we will get his thoughts when he comes back on this one. But we'll go ahead. We'll get some quick words from our competitors here to start, starting with Ryan Payne, new player coming to Nerdgasm. How do you feel about making your debut here in the geek debate realm?
Oh, well, I'm on 50-50. I mean, this is something I'm looking forward to, but then, then I immediately get buyer's remorse because I forget, going into geek culture, it's just more than what I know. Like, I can't talk about the stuff I want to talk about. I got to talk about everything else. And knowing that this is going to be a debate forum makes me realize maybe I should be more knowledgeable in certain sections of geek, like anime or certain comics past before the 1970s. Like, it's the one time where I think my laptop or my phone might not help me in this situation.
Absolutely. We'll go over to another person that we know from this community, Shawn McKee. We've seen him over in Fandom fights on the trivia side, getting into the debate side. How are you doing, Shawn? Are you excited to make your debut?
As I am before all of these, I'm nervous, but I debate about nerd stuff and geek stuff all the time, so I feel like I'll fit in here. I don't think there's a day that goes by where I don't argue with somebody about or debate with somebody about Star Wars, so or Marvel or DC or whatever. But yeah, I think I might do well here. Yeah.
Absolutely, and over to our last new debater today, Tom Zambeno. How are you, and are you excited to get into geek debate?
I am perfectly fine right now, and if I go down hard, at least I hope to go down entertaining.
That is a great way to look at it. We'll go over to our third judge today, Jay Burns. How are you doing? Are you? I'm happy that you and Megan were both able to step in last minute. Are you excited to do some judging?
Oh man, I'm always ready to pass judgment on other people, especially on the internet. It's something that I find incredibly fun to do. As you can see, I'm in a strange environment. I am at work. I am ready to listen to these arguments, and yeah.
Absolutely, but we'll get right into the first question. How the 3 prep rounds are going to work is you'll each have a minute opening. There'll be an open free form. How this is going to work is the judges will cut you off once we've heard enough in this format, and you'll have a minute for closing. All right, so your first question in the debate here today is, what Star Wars film is the weakest? So we'll go ahead. We will start with Shawn. You have 1 minute for your opening. Time begins when you start talking.
So I chose The Phantom Menace. It is, in my opinion, the weakest Star Wars movie. It's so disconnected from everything else that's going on. It takes 10 years. Takes place 10 years before 2 and 3. It has characters that are like main characters in this movie that don't ever show up again or of any import in the movies. Qui-Gon is an afterthought after this movie, and Darth Maul, I'd like to call him a villain, but that would imply that he's a character, and he's really not. The final battle is split between like 4 different battles. The flow doesn't work at all. To be honest, Duel of the Fates is really lackluster. It's got a good soundtrack, but there's really no emotion to the fight at all. You've got the obvious ones with, Jar Jar, but I don't want to rag on Jar Jar any more than everybody else already has. And, I think that's about it.
All right. Stopping a few seconds early. We'll go over to Tom. You have a minute for your opening. Time begins when you start talking.
All right. So, first question you got to ask yourselves is, what exactly defines a weak? And weak to me was the first occurrence of the frivolous Star Wars movie, the movie that It should have just stayed in all of our nerd heads. It should have stayed in the novels, stayed in the comic books that it's the first one we really didn't need to see, and that was Rogue One, A Star Wars Story. Rogue One answers a question that no one really needed a cinematic answer to. We know how the Death Star plans were taken. We knew that they were taken, given to Princess Leia, blah, 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 blah. What we didn't need is several very uninteresting characters with very bland acting performances, going through the motions for roughly an hour and a half until decent things finally started to happen.
Time. All right. And Ryan, we'll go to you 1 minute for your opening once we start talking.
Guess when it comes down to Star Wars, despite all the films that were presented to us and that have been shown to us in movies, I decided to go with one that before the franchise was brought back in the late 2000s, actually retreaded too much on the story that was brought before it, and that is Return of the Jedi. Now, for the first act of that movie, it plays like an original story, or at least it's going to tell its own version of, Luke becoming a Jedi, but then it falls into the retread paths. You get new Death Star. The Empire's building another Death Star. They get another team to get these Death Star plans, and then it leads into pretty much what happens to be the weirdest one-sided battle in all of Star Wars, and that's the Ewoks versus the Empire. This whole thing of primitive technology versus advanced technology. And despite what everyone wants to say, Star Wars, the Return of the Jedi also brings up the whole thing that the third movie in the trilogy sucks. So I'm going to stop right here.
All right, time. All right, so we will get into your open freeform. Time begins once you start talking. Shawn, go ahead and lead us off.
All right. Tom, you talked a lot about whether the movie needed to be done or not, which I don't think was the question. I think it was whether it was the weakest or not. And while we didn't need Rogue One, I think it's a pretty strong film. The characters, I'll give you, they didn't get as much as they needed, but they're definitely stronger than any of the characters from the prequels. And you've got the great action sequences and an engaging story, at least with Jyn and her father. And Ryan, I mean, Luke and Vader at the end of Return of the Jedi, like it does retread some ground, but like you get to see Lando flying the Millennium Falcon. You get to see Luke force choking a Gamorrean. You get to see the awesome fight at the Sarlacc pit, and you get to see father versus son. I don't know. I think that's an odd choice.
Well, I do want to do lend to you the elements that we got. Luke using the Force choke, Luke and Vader again. It's a great rematch. My issue with Return of the Jedi was the fact it had to retread them having to once again lower the defenses of the new Death Star, having to once again fly into the Death Star and destroy a weak part of it, kind of like how the A New Hope did. But with the Phantom Menace, sure, it's set way before the original trilogy, but it's a story of its own. I mean, sure, it placates on the whole idea that this is the story before the trilogy. Like and honestly, I kind of like the Phantom Menace for being its own story. You want to talk about how Qui-Gon Jinn and Darth Maul don't stand out? These are the two characters that actually had a shining spot because they're taken out of the trilogy and there's more mystery to their characters in the film universe. And Tom, for your argument, I mean, for your choice with being Rogue One, you want to talk about a movie that nobody wanted asked? That was Solo. Solo in itself was pretty much what I would clarify as a movie no one needed, because Han Solo's journey was something we all needed that couldn't have been played out in all of our headcanons. Rogue One, at least it was trying to do its best to explain the plot hole, or at least what everyone wanted to consider a plot hole, being that exposed vent exhaust system in the Death Star.
See, Solo may have been also unnecessary, but at least Solo was entertaining for more than 30 minutes of the film. As far as the Phantom Menace goes, Darth Maul did more acting with 0 lines than the entirety of Jyn Erso's the characterization of Jyn Erso. the entire first hour and a half was completely pointless. No one needed that plot hole. It was more entertaining when it was a plot hole of this random oversight in the Empire's hubris that destroyed them. That was much better that way than, oh, this guy randomly put this there to sabotage it. Ooh, like we haven't seen that many times before. As far as Return of the Jedi goes, it's not my favorite of the three at all of the original trilogy, but at least it does have that wicked ending. It does have Emperor Palpatine pulling pulling Vader towards Luke, back and forth from the light side to the dark side. It gives you the redemption of Vader, which is pretty cool. So at least it has that ending, even though I do hate the Ewoks. I'll give you that one.
I do want to talk about with Rogue One.
Ryan, we're gonna keep going down the line. So like Shawn,
okay.
And then you, and then yeah.
Okay, no problem.
So Darth Maul doing more acting without lines than Jyn Erso's entire performance, I would disagree with. Jyn Erso at least emotes. Maul just stands in the background looking menacing, and then when it's finally his time to shine, the only way he's able to take them on is by fighting them one-on-one. He has to keep separating them. Like, it's boring. It's not as enthusing as Vader or even Count Dooku in Attack of the Clones. And when it comes to Return of the Jedi, I don't think it's that much of a retread. Sure, you get the end of the Death Star again, but in Attack of the Clones, you're not, or in A New Hope, you're not trying to bring down the defenses. They're trying to bring down the tractor beam so they can leave in the first place. That's different. And Luke is fighting Vader, and that's a much bigger fight than we ever got in A New Hope. So I don't really see it as that much of a retread. The only retread is really the fact that there is a Death Star.
I am going to counter you because later on in the movie, the Emperor reveals that the whole thing was a trap to Luke, and the shield of the new Death Star was still operational. So yes, they had to destroy the shields there. So, but to carry on to Darth Maul not like having much acting, him just being intimidating, not having to say a single word made him intimidating, because you take one look at him, you see how he uses his lightsaber against Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon Jinn, tells enough about him. He was a tool sharpened for war, for Emperor Palpatine to use against the Jedi. And the moment he kills Qui-Gon, he doesn't have to taunt Obi-Wan. Just the image of seeing Qui-Gon dead right behind him while he's pacing back and forth and back and forth while Obi-Wan is stirring with emotion. He didn't have to say a lot in that. That tells you a lot about Darth Maul. He's not trying to revel in someone dying. He just wants to kill and move forward to please his master. And with Rogue One, Jyn Erso's relationship with her father is the core of her character, which leads to some of her good acting abilities, at least when it comes to that stare down between her and Cassian after she finds out Cassian was given an order to kill her father, which also revealed one thing that was never explained throughout the original trilogy. Was there some dirty tactics or a gray area the rebellion had to operate in?
The answer to that question was always, of course. You're not a rebellion if you don't use dirty tactics. That's incredibly obvious, and we didn't need hour and a half of boring content just to get that. We didn't need to see Jyn Erso and the mannequin they called Cassian Andor staring down. We didn't need a comedic droid making random sarcastic humor in a movie that had a completely different tone outside of him. He was in a completely different film. As far as Phantom Menace goes, I do feel I have to bring up pod racing to the people here. Yes, it is absolutely disconnected, never comes back to the rest, but it's awesome. And it does at least establish Anakin as a hell of a pilot. So I'll give it that, and it's fantastic. But with Duel of Fates, we've already talked enough about Darth Maul. Let's talk about the Trade Federation for a second. It brought some interest. It brought some intrigue to the Star Wars universe. It brought something new, something that Rogue One absolutely could not deliver, something that Return of the Jedi could not deliver. It brought something new. It brought something behind the Empire. It set up the pillars that would be the fall of the Republic and the rise of the Empire. It was at least interesting.
But it really... Oh, okay.
Oh, no. I was going to say, what we're going to do is, Shawn, you're going to have another 30 seconds to do body of the body of your argument. And then, Ryan, when we get back to you, we're going to start doing closings. So
Okay.
this is, we'll say this is our last 30-minute freeform for you, Shawn, and then we'll get into closings for the rest of you altogether. So.
You're saying that the Trade Federation was interesting, and I would argue it wasn't at all. The ideas behind it, maybe, but they'd never explain it properly. The point when they try to do that, the movie comes for a grinding halt on Coruscant. And while we're on the topic of Coruscant, we see the Jedi Masters we see the Jedi Council, and we're like, oh, this is what we've heard about, the Jedis, when they were at their best. And then they go, all right, back to Naboo. Bye. We'll see you next movie for the Jedi. We don't get any of the Jedi.
All right, so we'll go ahead. We'll get into closings now. And 1 minute for your closing when you start talking.
Return of the Jedi at the time was meant to be seen as the final chapter in the Star Wars trilogy, because after Empire Strikes Back, there was a lot of speculation and hype to how this was going to end. Having them retread the Empire, rebuilding the Death Star, having them go to a planet, an Endor, teaming with the primitive life form as the Ewoks, trying to take down this machine that we saw in Empire was able to systematically infiltrate and corrupt a system like Bespin. To see something that should have been an easily one-sided fight with the Empire, destroying the Ewoks, showing how abysmal it was, how tall this machine was to defeat, instead was flipped on its head. Instead of giving us a very story of light finally overcoming darkness, turned into its final act, at least on the planet of Endor, into a bit of a comedic joke of the Empire itself. Luke turning to the light side was a good moment, but it was only until he was beaten down by Luke, when Luke showed that he could still harness his anger but not have to go down that way. And having seen Luke in danger was one thing. But Return of the Jedi still retread on a lot of stuff to us, making me say it's the worst of the three.
All right. We'll go to Tom. 1 minute for your closing when you start talking.
All right. You mentioned how the Trade Federation was not explained properly. I do want to say it was underexplained. I do want to say that over-explanation is the entire reason why Rogue One is the worst and the weakest of the three. We did not need this story. It was not a plot hole to begin with. It was an interesting idea that the Death Star had a flaw. Instead, it's just a sabotage self-put there. So we didn't need this. It was completely unnecessary. At least with Return of the Jedi, it closed out an entire 3-movie arc with that wonderful final act. And at least with Episode 1, you start setting up the pillars of what would be the beginning of the 3-film arc, ending with the fall of the Empire, or the rise of the Empire. What we got in Rogue One was just random filler. It didn't need to be there. So why is it weak? Because it didn't need to be there.
All right. Time and Shawn, 1 minute for your closing when you start talking.
So, again, Darth Maul, I'm sorry. Standing menacingly, a good character does not make. Maybe if he showed up again later in the movies, it would have helped him, but we're talking about Phantom Menace, right? Ewan McGregor, at this point, hadn't really figured out Obi-Wan yet. Liam Neeson sounds like he's phoning it in as Qui-Gon. A lackluster final battle compared to either Rogue One or Return of the Jedi. And it comes to a screeching halt on Coruscant. And I would argue that most of Tatooine is also a screeching halt. I think I've made my point. I don't really think there's anything else I need to say about the Phantom Menace.
All right, conceding time. We will go ahead. We will go get judges' thoughts. Strong first battle. We will start with Maggie. Where are you leaning and why?
All right, so I don't know. Do I say who I am picking first? Is that how this goes?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to give the point to Shawn because I think of all of the arguments, he gave the most reasons why his was the weakest, while I really think that the Rogue One argument that it was unnecessary is a good argument, doesn't necessarily lend itself to the fact that it was weak. Because you started there, but then you got kind of off track, and I think that did not help you. And then with Return of the Jedi, saying that it was too similar, they were really able to counter you with the ending and how it really closed out the trilogy. Also, if you're saying that Jedi is too rehash, then Force Awakens is too rehash, which I don't think is true. But anyway, I think that Shawn ultimately gave more reasons as to why his movie was the worst, and that's why I'm giving the point to him.
All right. I will go next. I'm also going to be giving my point to Shawn. I think that Shawn made a really strong point as to why Phantom Menace is the weakest, bringing up actual plot flaws. Plot flaws that mouths and words. But Ryan got a little battered by the two of them that teamed up on him at the end, and I think Tom had a really strong argument for why it's unnecessary, but the question was weakest, and he kind of got a little off there. Jay, you did not get to give your vote, but where would you have gone and why?
So I got my notes right here. I got my notes, and I got the word retread said by Ryan about 8.5 times. So I hear a lot of the same repetitive argument being made. That doesn't really work for me. Shawn was able to worst.
You're breaking up a bit there, Jay. I don't know what you're saying right now. You're breaking up a little bit there.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you a little bit, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Shawn would have gotten my point. Let's leave it at that.
All right. So Shawn gets the first point as we move to the second question of the round of the prep fights. Your second question is, which Star Trek film is the most enjoyable? This time we will start with Tom on this one. 1 minute for your opening argument when you start talking.
All right, cool. I can finally go back into my hole, stop talking about Star Wars for a while, and start talking about Star Trek, something I actually care about these days. So, Star Trek, my pick for the most entertaining Star Trek movie is clearly Star Trek IV: The Voyage Home. It is not the best Star Trek movie in my mind, but the question is entertaining. And there's nothing more entertaining than a good fish out of water sequence. In this case, we get a fish out of water sequence for basically the entire runtime. The crew being dumped into 1980s San Francisco is comedic gold. Watching their interactions with normal humans of that time period is nothing short of fantastic. From Scotty interacting, trying to figure out at that point, modern day computer, to Chekhov running around saying nuclear vessels back when people still feared the Russians. So this movie is just a joy. After the first two of the sort of 2, 3, 4 trilogy, first two were super serious. The third movie finally got to a bit of lightheartedness, and that's what makes it the most entertaining.
All right, time. All right, so we will go to Ryan next. 1 minute for your opening when you start talking.
Okay, for at least for me, when it comes to Star Trek films, what I find enjoyable is how the Star Trek films are able to take advantage of the elements that it has, at least for Star Trek being in space, and taking advantage of its element, which is main cast, the crew. And I picked Star Trek VI: The Undiscovered Country. This is very enjoyable because it takes a whole series from the beginning of Star Trek to the final, which I believe is the final chapter of the original crew, because this is taking an element to what not many of the crew, or at least Kirk in his position, is comfortable with, and that is making peace with your enemy. Kirk has to sit across the scenes where Sid has to sit across a table and make bread with the Klingons is telling in a lot of tension, because it also draws back to Kirk's feelings from episode 3, the fact that Klingon is responsible for killing his son, and how it's used against him in a sabotage attempt, not just by Klingons, but also by members of his own Federation trying to continue this war and hostility between the Klingons and the Federation. And I like how it plays as a scaffold to try to dig through and seed out and end the conflict. Yeah.
All right, so Shawn, 1 minute for your opening when you start talking.
All right, I picked Star Trek 2009. Coming out, it had a lot going against it. It was obviously coming back to a series that nobody really wanted to see rebooted, especially with a new cast. They had that tagline of "Not Your Daddy's Star Trek." It had a lot against it, but still, it managed to be extremely enjoyable, even with everything stacked against it. The entire new cast is great. The dynamic between Chris Pine as Kirk and Spock, their dynamic is really good when Kirk has to emotionally compromise Spock in order to get control of the ship back. Seeing Leonard Nimoy come back, the entire action set piece on the drill is really enjoyable. Carl Urban as McCoy and Scotty, everything about this movie was stacked against it, but still extremely enjoyable.
All right, time. All right, so we'll get into the freeform, starting with Tom, and then we'll go to Ryan, and then we'll go to Shawn, just like that. Before we get back into the regular round, guys, if you see me do this, I mean, just wrap up your current thought and move on to the next person. That way we keep it quick flow. So, Tom, go ahead. As soon as you start talking, freeform will begin.
All right, I would like to start off with Star Trek VI: The Undiscovered Country is a fantastic film. I, as a huge Star Trek buff, love that film, but it is, of the three films we're talking about here, it is the most Star Trek. And that is not as enjoyable for a wider audience. So it's a lot of themes. It's the most thematic Star Trek film. For the most part, not the most enjoyable. Star Trek 2009 was a rough plot retread of Star Trek Nemesis, and nobody's favorite Star Trek film, along with complete retreads of every single character. It would have done just fine with those actors, with brand new crew. There was no reason to have them just do a complete dime store knockoff of the original crew. It was completely weird for them to reboot it that way. So it was just a retread, and the lens flares.
All right, so we'll go to Ryan.
Star Trek 6, sure, it might be the most Star Trek of the film, but one of its strengths is the fact that it is staying to what one of the core is of Star Trek. It is showing you this world of Star Trek, because one thing we haven't seen in many of the previous films of Star Trek that does take place in space, or at least on the Enterprise, is that we are actually seeing a new venture here. We are actually seeing at least diplomacy being used with Star Trek, because remember, these are meant to be explorers. Most of these films, they're almost seen as either they have to resolve a conflict with either through violence, or they're using conflict through ingenuity, and it takes both of those elements and brings it down to what it should be, pretty much a peace talk between two nations that finally just want to end a chapter of violence and do something that none of these two entities have ever thought of: peace.
Tom, it feels like we keep coming back to the need to be this way. Sure, Star Trek 2009 did not need to be the same original crew, but that wasn't really the question. Like, it's still enjoyable regardless of it being the same original crew. And you talk about how while Undiscovered Country is the most Star Trek film, that's not as enjoyable to the wide audience. Voyage Home is a little too weird for the wide audience, whereas Star Trek 2009, that movie, for better or for worse, is built for the wide audience. You have excitement, again, the drill, the opening scene with Chris Hemsworth. You have heartbreak with Spock and his mother, and lots of comedy as well in Scotty. Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
You're fine.
Yeah, so as far as weird, Star Trek 4 is the only part that's weird is the alien starship and the whale singing. Literally the only thing that was weird. The bulk of the movie is just a fish out of water sequence with the original crew just getting to be themselves and riff against 1980 San Francisco. Not that weird. As far as Star Trek 2009 goes, I think you misinterpreted. I didn't say it was unneeded. It's just a shameless rehash. I don't understand why they just brought back the old crew with a bunch of impressions instead of an entirely new crew. Yes, it was built for the wide audiences as a reboot, but I feel like the Star Trek name could have been used better in a film that just ended up being a 2-hour just production tryout for J.J. Abrams for Star Wars.
Well, one thing about Star Trek 4 that kept throwing me off most of the time was the whales, actually. The fact that you have, coming off of 3, Spock still trying to regain most of his memories, or he's trying to adjust, having coming back from the death. And already he's able to assess the threat. He's able to calculate time travel. He's able to go back in time. And the fact is, oh my God, Spock, I mean, he's not very frustrating in this movie. It just feels odd that you go back in time to 1987 San Francisco, Spock would look a little odd. And the closest thing you can to conceal his identity is just to wrap a headband around him to protect his ears. It would have been best to at least have him near the ship so he can be able to assess the situation from far away. And in 2009, you want to talk about heartbreaking moments that 2009 thought? I mean, sure, the whole thing with Spock and his mother was one thing, but there really wasn't much to sell me on that relationship. I mean, there was the flashbacks and look into Spock's life, but I felt more tied to Kirk, the fact that there's his father's shadow, and he has so much daddy issues. For Spock, on the other hand, it should have been about, right.
Thank you. You're right. Kirk being under his father's shadow is something that's really tough, especially since we see his father at the beginning of the movie. And when it comes to whether or not Star Trek 2009 is a tryout for J.J. Abrams to do Star Wars, maybe, again, not the question. Is it still enjoyable? Is it an enjoyable movie? I think it is. I think that there's a lot going on in it. I think you're capturing pretty much everything in a major blockbuster film. And I think it's really enjoyable. I'll see the rest of my time.
Yeah, it's enjoyable for a Star Wars movie. It's a lot of lasers and blasting and then you go and confuse people with time travel. The space fights are cool, but then you throw in some weird time travel stuff with Nero, who you haven't really mentioned so far. Nero is just basically a dime store version of Shenzan from Star Trek Nemesis. He's far less charismatic, far less entertaining. He tries to be intimidating, but he doesn't nearly have enough time to become intimidating. Star Trek 4 doesn't even pretend to have a villain because it doesn't need one. The whale stuff is weird, but the whale stuff was just to set up the thought process that if someone were to come contact the ancient Earth, they're probably not talking to humans, and sets up another Star Trek ideal that maybe humans are not the center of the world. I think your finger was starting to spin. You cut out.
Sorry. What we're going to do is we're going to start going into closing, starting with Ryan. You're going to have 1 minute for your closing once you start talking.
Star Trek 6 is enjoyable because it gives, just like Star Trek 4, it separates our cast. But instead of it being a fun romp, it separates them through tragic circumstance. McCoy and Kirk are stranded on a planet because they have been framed for a murder. We get the crew, we get Spock, we get Uhura, we get Montgomery, and we get Chekhov having to discuss amongst themselves, not just orchestrate a rescue plan, but they have to figure out exactly who amongst them is the traitors, because we are seeing this team actually use logical conclusions. They're using deductive thinking, and they're being constructive about it. Sure, they are turning their back a bit on the Federation and ignoring orders, but throughout that, you get to see them take one problem at a time and move forward through it, keeping you intrigued while Kirk and McCoy still have to stay alive long enough for them to get And this is on the chance that they could not have been rescued too. And with the end, having Kirk to resolve his issues and to finally make peace with the race that is responsible for his son's death, I find it enjoyable and as a good healthy arc for Kirk.
All right. We'll go to Shawn. 1 minute for your closing when you start talking.
All right. Star Trek 2009 is the most enjoyable Star Trek movie, in my opinion. Like I said, Chris Pine as Kirk, Spock is great, McCoy is great, Scotty's great. Everybody is entertaining. It's a fun time. The action is good. Nero, I think, is actually a somewhat compelling villain. He's got the whole dead species. He's mad at future Spock for not being able to save his the rest of his species. Seeing Leonard Nimoy reprise the role is amazing. Chris Hemsworth, at the beginning, he still gives a very good performance. You can tell the regret but the sense of duty and what he has to do, and knowing that his son is going to have to grow up without him. And I think Star Trek 2009, while it might not be the best Star Trek movie, I think it's the most enjoyable.
All right. And we will go to Tom. 1 minute for your closing when you start talking.
All right, I think I've talked enough about the other two, but Star Trek IV, The Voyage Home, is just a lighthearted, whimsical end to what was a brilliant trilogy between Star Trek 2, 3, and 4. I keep driving home the fish out of water sequence, but it really is a chance to get to know the characters and let them interact with the world as we know it. Because we all talk about, who would you want to meet in a bar, or who would you want to hang out with? Well, here's how it is, basically hanging out with fictional characters, and it's weird. It's weird. It's funny. The interactions are bizarre. Spock nerve pinches some punk kid on a bus. That's fantastic. And all of this because these guys, these outlaws right now, are running from the Federation, and they are the last hope to save the whales, guys.
All right, time. All right, strong round from all three. Jay, you did not give your vote last time, so we will start with you. Where are you leaning and why?
I'm sorry, the guy in the black Spider-Man shirt, not the Venom shirt, but that's Tom, correct?
Yes.
Okay. I've heard quite a bit from Tom about what makes his the most enjoyable to watch versus what doesn't make the other two. So Tom would get my point this round.
All right. Tom gets 1 point from Jay on that one. I'll go next. I think that Ryan got kind of caught up. He had a really strong closing there as to why 6 is a compelling movie, but he was beat down by the other two for most of the fight. I think it really came down to Star Trek 09 and Star Trek The Voyage Home in this one, and I think that Tom kind of stepped in a couple of Shawn's traps a few times, kind of giving Shawn ammunition to make his more enjoyable. Even though he was really close in his closing there, was really compelling us to selling the movie. I need to hear that just a little bit sooner, so with the slightest edge, I'm going to give my point to Shawn. So, Maggie, where are you leaning and why?
Having a struggle. I agree that it sort of has come down to between Voyage Home and Star Trek 09. I think you both gave really good examples or why it's the most enjoyable, even though you don't think it's the best. Ultimately, I think I'm going to go with Shawn just because Tom got a little bit distracted by the rehash thing, and I don't know that necessarily supported your argument. Like, it doesn't matter if it's something that's a remake. People love remakes and that sort of thing. So I think that's that. With that one thing, I think I'm going to go with Shawn.
All right, so Shawn goes up 2-0 as we get into the third speed round question, which is, what is the best season of Community? Ryan, you're going to go first on this one. You have 1 minute for your opening when you start talking.
Now, to be honest, this was definitely a hard one to choose because there are at least 4 seasons of Community we could choose that are the favorite. But for me, I decided to go with the first season of Community because this was pretty much a make it or break all, especially it being on NBC. NBC may be a home for comedies, but it always likes to stay to the situational comedy, the multi-camera comedies. this was experimental for NBC because not only do we have a great cast of characters, but each one of them are different, not just individually, but personality-wise. And also the writing that was used on Community was completely different to all the comedies that was on NBC before, like Will and Grace, Friends. For Community, this stayed not only in just one location of a community college, but it did its best to not only show us why, not to entangle us into this group of characters, to love them and to love this community college, which in reality, I'm not sure many people would want to go to. I'm going to stop right here.
All right, time will go to Shawn next. You have 1 minute for your opening when you start talking.
All right, season 2, I think, is when Community really hit its stride. That is when we got some of the most inventive episodes. I mean, we got a bottle episode that's maybe one of the best episodes of Community in Annie's Pen episode. We have a clip show episode with completely new clips. There is none of those clips are from old episodes, which is great. It's a genius. All the characters are at their peak character. All the actors have figured out who their characters are. The Dean is a lot better in season 2. Chang becomes a lot better in season 2. I mean, you've got some cool episodes like the Dungeons and Dragons episode. You've got the fun animated Christmas episode with John Oliver in it. You've got Annie chloroforming a guard in one of the episodes. Betty White is in this season. Like, come on.
All right, time. And Tom, 1 minute for your opening when you start talking.
All right, like Ryan said, this was a pretty difficult decision. Especially trying to remember all the seasons of Community and what great episodes. But I will summarize my season with 3 words: remedial chaos theory. Season 3, with that episode as sort of the linchpin. You want to talk bottle episodes, man. Remedial Chaos Theory is the bottle episode. This random time multiverse episode where they try to figure out the darkest timeline. It's a legendary episode of Community for a reason, but not just Remedial Chaos Theory. This introduces John Goodman, the tour de force that is John Goodman, bringing in the air conditioner school. It brings in Annie trying to live with Troy and Abed. It has the Blanket Wars 2-parter. Season 3 is really peak Community for me.
Time. All right. 3 strong openings. We get into free form. Ryan, you go ahead and kick it off when you start talking.
Man, this is going to be ridiculous. It's like I'm putting a rock in a hard corner. But, despite the episodes that you listed, Shawn, season 1 had great episodes too. It had the the STD fair. It had the Modern Warfare, which gave us the paintball episode. We also had the PE episode, which is all straight on billiards. Most of these episodes were all designed to give us a character, show us one of their flaws, or at least a personality issue with them. And most of the time, the episode was always there to challenge it. Like the Christmas episode, it was all challenging Shirley's idea of what Christmas really is by having everyone in the group have their own, not only just their own religion, but their own ideas of Christmas. And that itself also solidifies them as a family. Tom, season 3 is great with Remedial Chaos Theory and Annie moving in with them. But I still think that the Valentine's episode with Jeff trying to get drunk to do a drunk dial to Britta in order to cheer up and make her happy, while at the same time having a girlfriend, I think is better because we see Abed at one of his best, which also leads to one of his lowest, him discovering for the first time he gets blackout drunk and not remembering a damn thing.
So we're talking about the best season of Community. Community's a sitcom. When I think of best seasons of sitcoms, it has to be rewatchable, right? And still have as much enjoyment every time you rewatch it. Remedial Chaos Theory is so good because you never know what's going to happen next. Once you know what's going to happen next on rewatches, it kind of loses some of that. You know what doesn't lose some of that on rewatches? the conspiracy theory episode, because at the end you have the dean as your viewpoint. You doesn't matter that you know what's coming, the dean doesn't. And every time you watch the dean pop between, oh, I made an alliance with them, I made an alliance with them, oh no, the cops are here, everybody's getting shot, it doesn't matter that you know what's happening. Watching him not know what's happening is hilarious every time. And talking about the paintball episode from season 1, great, it set the foundation. Then in season 2, we got a Western paintball episode that then became a Star Wars paintball episode, right? And the entire school becomes a Western place. It's amazing.
And then in season 3, we evolved that even further to further escalation with pillow forts. Guys, Pillow Wars was the pinnacle. And then, as far as rewatching Remedial Chaos Theory, I don't think it loses something when you rewatch and you know what's going to happen. Because I could rewatch it right now and still have fun with it. It's still hilarious watching every single version through Abed's head trying to figure out the darkest timeline. Yeah, we know what the darkest timeline is, but do you? And then they always call back to that episode in later seasons when they ask themselves, wait, are we on the darkest timeline? So not just I'm kind of contradicting myself, not quite a bottle episode, because it keeps coming back as a running joke in the series. Season 1, it was the pillar, it set everything up, but season 3 is when it knocked it out.
You guys keep saying how season 1's kind of like a pillar of it. I take that as a good thing because it has such a strong foundation to build further onto it. And there are things in season 1 that I think did something better than season 2 and 3. Shawn, you talked about how Dean and Chang are very good in season 2. I actually think they were at their best in season 1 because in season 1, you just get the dean as a guy who's just trying to make this school great before he gets sucked into this identity of having different outfits, as you see in the bottle episode. And with Chang, in later seasons, he's just driven to be more crazy and maniacal, while in the first season, he's just dialed back to a guy who just lied to get into a job. And the episode where Troy and Abed are taking care of Mouse and Jeff becomes friends with Chang, you find out that he has a wife, and one of the things about him, he's very insecure about himself. And I think that is a great foundation there because later in the season where you have Family Day, you find out he has a brother and that he's, no matter what happened, and his brother criticizes about his own identity to where he says, it's just who I am, accept me for it. He just wants to be accepted. I think it's better in season 1. Sorry.
We talk about the characters in season 1 being simpler almost. I think Community is at its best when it's not simple. So the evolution of Chang from just a guy who lied into getting his job to being psychotic and hearing voices, I think that is what Community is. The dean getting weirder and weirder, that's what Community is to me. It's about this school that the more time you spend there, the crazier and crazier you become. I mean, eventually they do the never mind. The crazier and crazier you become, the more time you spend there. And I think that begins in season 2. Everybody's still relatively normal in season 1. They're weird, but it's not too much. Season 2, you start to see the effects of being in this ecosystem, and you start to see who these people become.
And what they become is Chang taking over the school and wearing a Napoleon suit. Mm-hmm. Because season 3, yes, season 1 was dialed back Chang, but season 3, we got Max Chang, baby. When he rolls in, taking over the school in a Napoleon costume, and John Goodman has to come in to help, yeah, we've hit max level here. So yes, season 3, we keep escalating. Season 1, great. Season 2 built off that. Season 3 exploded from that. We got the, of course, I've come back to Remedial Chaos Theory, but we have Annie trying to move in with Troy and Abed. Annie discovering what these two guys are really about other than being in school, trying to get along with them. We have the blanket wars of further escalation, highlighting season 3 as, again, a further escalation of the show. This season is I simply max level.
All right, so Ryan, you can use this as your like last body, and then we'll get to Shawn, and Shawn, you'll kick off closings. So, good.
We all talk about every season. Season 2 and 3 have great moments to build off from. One thing I like about the one thing I think season 1 did well that I don't think was replicated much in season 2 and 3 is that they had one episode dedicated to just destroying and picking apart the characters of Jeff and Britta, and that is the art of discourse, where you have Jeff and Britta going against 3 teenagers who were written to be not just mean, annoying, and pretty much some people you just want to punch in the face. They were written like that to test your patience. They were written because throughout the first season, Pierce, we see him as a bit racist. He has like this old mentality, but then you bring in 3 younger people who kind of see Jeff and Britta that way. And the whole Schmitty, Schmitty. The more annoying and grating it gets to you, you kind of see from Pierce and Shirley's point of view why Jeff and Britta have such fragile egos, why they need to be brought down a peg compared to those 2.
All right, so Shawn, you have 1 minute for your closing when you start talking.
So I've talked about the Western paintball, the Star Wars paintball. I've talked about the conspiracy theory episode. I've talked about all these episodes, the Dungeons and Dragons, but that's just the tip of the iceberg in season 2. We have Luca, who's committed war crimes, and Britta falls for him. We have the bar episode where Troy says that everybody is 10 for 2 years. We have Dr. Rich and the pottery scene. Britta befriends a girl because she thinks she's gay, but the girl is only befriending Britta because she thinks that Britta is gay. We have Pierce's mother's episode where we deal with what happens when we're gone, and we have a hidden storyline in the background with Abed helping a couple give birth. I mean, we have Abed at peak Abed when he makes a movie about how directors are Jesus. I think season 2 is the best season of Community.
All right, time. We will go to Tom. 1 minute for your closing when you start talking.
All right, I've talked a lot about remedial chaos theory, about John Goodman, about Annie moving in with Troy and Abed, and about Senor Chang. And that's really a lot of what season 3 is about. It's about several of these characters becoming high level. You have Pierce starting to become even crazier. You have everybody having to deal with Troy and Abed and their growing friendship and insanity. Those 2 become a huge thing in season 3, Troy and Abed. Season 3 is just pure escalation, and I think I've said all I need to say about that, and I will forego the rest of my time.
All right. So Ryan, 1 minute for your closer when you start talking.
One thing you brought up was that season 1 is brought down to its simplest terms, and I think that's where season 1 works, because the most important theme of season 1 was family, and how throughout the first 7 episodes I've mentioned before, it focused on creating these characters as a family unit together. By the Halloween episode, which we want to talk about, the Halloween episode gives us the greatest moment, which is Abed is Batman. It shows that how Jeff, as an outsider, didn't want nothing to do with these people, and now he comes to accept them as his family, and it's even solidified even stronger in the Christmas episode, to where they accept each other, their faults and all. To Pierce, yeah, he gets crazier on, but in season 1, you kind of see why he's like that. He's alone, not many people like him, and you see that he attached himself to Jeff because he sees a kindred spirit. It's shown in the STD Fair episode, and you see how much he respects Shirley in the Art of Discord episode. In Abed, we see from the episode in PE how he already accepts his identity to where he wants everyone else to be.
All right, time. Great fight, guys. Great round. We'll go ahead. I'll go ahead and start this one off. I'm giving my point to Ryan. I think when it came down to these arguments, Ryan had the hardest task. He took the first season, and that implies that the show never gets better. And everyone pounded him for that. I think he fought back from that really well by explaining why season 1 is the simplest and like how it works together and defines those characters in a way that I actually am really impressed with the argument. So I'm giving him the point. We'll go to Maggie. Where are you leaning and why?
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say. I agree. I would give the point to Ryan because I think that he did a really good job of citing specific. You all cited specific episodes, which was great, but like giving specific examples within that and how it leads to things in the future. And I really thought that your foundational argument was really good. So that's why I'm giving Ryan the point.
All right, so with that, Ryan is taking this to the speed round with Shawn. Unfortunately, Tom, that means that you have been eliminated here today. You are free to stick around. We'll get your thoughts when we're done. Jay, you didn't get to give your point. Where you've leaned in why on that last
one? Up to a certain point, I was actually leaning towards Tom, but you were not wrong. The way that Ryan had to punch up in order to actually sell season 1 did a really good job. I think the only thing that would have made me actually lean towards Tom a little bit more is if Tom had like mentioned the character switch up that is Britta like halfway through season 1, but nobody even touched on that, and that would have been a knockout for me. But no, it's one of those things that wasn't mentioned. So Ryan would have actually gotten my point as well.
All right. So with that, we move into the speed round. How this is going to work is we will ask the question. Whoever gives the answer first will be going first. You're going to have, I believe, 30 seconds for your opening and 15 seconds for your rebuttal is the way that we do it here. If not, then Cody's going to yell at me later, and that's fine. He always yells at me. So we get into your first speed round question, which is best DC film to not feature Batman, Superman, or Wonder Woman.
Shazam.
Aquaman.
Wait.
I was gonna say.
Does that count at the very end? He's not a main character, and he's not even a supporting character in it.
He's still in the movie though.
Yeah,
he doesn't bring anything to it.
It doesn't. He kind of does. He kind of does. Like personally,
does it have to connect to the DCE, or is it just DC movie in itself?
DC as a whole. It was best DC film to not feature Batman, Superman, or Wonder Woman. So.
Yep, I'm gonna stick with Aquaman.
I don't think I can accept Shazam because Superman is physically in that movie.
Yeah, the ending credit.
Yeah. Oh, I messed up.
So Ryan's gonna go first with Aquaman, but Shawn, we need to get your answer before we.
Yeah.
So.
I'm so screwed. Green Lantern.
Oh, I was gonna say that.
I thought other film had the Green Lantern.
Guys, V for Vendetta is the thing.
Yeah,
I haven't seen Watchmen.
We've got Aquaman versus Green Lantern. Ryan, you have 30 seconds when you start talking.
Aquaman is a great movie because it focuses on the character of Aquaman himself. It's pretty much his journey on wanting to choose being worthy as a leader, that Aquaman had to get over his hangups of losing his mother, having to take up the responsibility in moving forward as a hero, as a protector. Otherwise, the final act of the movie wouldn't have fallen apart if he didn't accept his identity as a king, his identity as a protector. Because I love that line he says, he's a blunt instrument. He knows what he's about. It's about him growing past that, moving forward.
Time. All right. All right. Shawn, you have 30 seconds when you start talking for your opening.
Green Lantern has Ryan Reynolds. I mean, Ryan Reynolds is the best man alive, and he's in that movie. And Mark Strong isn't bad as Sinestro in it. And I think it should win off Ryan Reynolds alone. And they make fun of it later in Deadpool, and they could never make fun of it in Deadpool if it didn't exist. So that means that it's the best movie because it allows Deadpool to make fun of it. Gotcha. Checkmate.
All right. 15-second rebuttal for you, Ryan, when you start talking.
You want to talk about Green Lantern being made fun of? In Shazam, they make fun of Aquaman because he talks to fish. Okay, you move forward, but other than that, there's great characters too. Jason Momoa is incredible as Aquaman. Amber Heard is great as Mera, as his stoic character. And for Christ's sakes, Willem Dafoe as Volko, someone who we thought Willem Dafoe was going to be the most hammy as. No, he plays it very reserved as his general and as a caretaker for Aquaman.
All right. Shawn, 15 seconds for your closing when you start talking.
Aquaman gets to build off of the great casting from Justice League. Green Lantern does it by himself. Yeah, there's no other movie that they get to build off casting wise. They got Ryan Reynolds all on their own. That was their idea, no one else's.
Time. All right, I'm gonna start with Jay on this one since you didn't get to give your vote last time. Where are you leaning and why?
Big oof. Big oof. Ryan gets my point. It has nothing to do with like the Google search. It's really kind of like the half-hearted, lackluster argument of Green Lantern. I think the best point she made was if they didn't make it, they couldn't have made fun of it in Deadpool, but this is DC, not Marvel. Yeah, unfortunately, Ryan just was able to knock it out of the park with his Aquaman argument. Ryan gets my point.
All right, Maggie, where are you leaning and why?
Yeah, I also have to give a point to Ryan. I give Shawn points for being creative with that Deadpool argument, but saying that Ryan Reynolds is like the reason that this is the best DC movie is weak. Sorry. So,
with that, Ryan gets the point. It's tied up, which means we are going to the last question here for game point. I also would have gone with Ryan just because it's going based purely on the arguments. I think Ryan gave me more depth about, pun intended, on Aquaman. On that.
Boy,
one.
I wish I remembered Community episodes more, because guys, V for Vendetta is a thing.
Can I give you a point too?
I would have argued Constantine if you didn't want to do Shazam.
All right, so this brings us to the last speed round question, which is in the category of Jurassic Park, which we have the GOAT of Jurassic Park on call. Your question in the category of Jurassic Park: what is the best death scene in a Jurassic Park film?
Jurassic toilet in the first Jurassic Park.
Y'all talked.
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Y'all are talking over each other. So, Shawn, I heard you starting talking first. So, what were you saying?
Sorry.
Jurassic Park, when the lady gets dropped into the mouth of that, or not Jurassic Park, Jurassic World, where the lady gets dropped into the mouth of that sea creature.
Okay. And then
my argument was in the first Jurassic Park, the lawyer who runs to the bathroom and gets eaten on the toilet.
Okay. Toilet eating, dropping into a Mosasaurus mouth. This is going to be great. Shawn, you started talking first, so you have 30 seconds when you start talking.
All right, that is the best kill because you have no idea where it's going. It starts off, she gets picked up, oh, she gets back down. Oh, she's going to be safe for a little bit longer. They're going to use her more in the movie. She gets picked up again. Oh, no, she gets picked up again. And then you think, oh, it's over. They're going to drop her into the water. She's going to drown. And then you see that monster. It's amazing. It keeps going. It doesn't stop. And it's great.
All right. Ryan, 30 seconds when you start talking.
The lawyer, throughout the first, when you introduced him, he is there to shut down John Hammond's park, but then he's turned because of greed and capitalism. And then when the T-Rex gets loose, the first thing he does, he abandons Hammond's grandchildren, the man he is trying to impress to his corporate back sponsors. He abandons them to where the T-Rex, admittedly, and I think through a divine sense of fate, goes to the toilet, and it stalls a little bit to where you think the lawyer is going to sneak his way out of there. Nope. That mouth comes down, grabs him mid-waist, and then shovels him around before it bites him.
All right. 15 seconds, Shawn, when you start talking.
You want to talk about people that deserve to die? That lady deserved to die. She was the absolute worst. She was awful to those kids, did not care about her job. She was the worst, and I wish the death scene had gone longer.
All right. Ryan, 15 seconds for your closing when you start talking.
Are you smoking crack? That's dreadful, okay? The lawyer treated the kids worse because all he was more important about was looking at this park and getting money. And instead of stepping up to protect these children like Grant and Malcolm did, he runs away and abandons them, traumatizing that girl to where she keeps saying, us.
All right. Wow. This is a great, this is the most entertaining fight. I think this is the first time in Nerdgasm history where someone screamed, "Are you smoking crack?" So that's the first.
I doubt that. I'm
gonna go ahead and get mine first. By the skin of a dinosaur's tooth, I'm going with Shawn. Yeah. I think with this one, I think the opening was really strong in painting the picture, and then Ryan kind of fell into his trap of like, I'm going to counter with why my person's terrible. And then Ryan got off track on this person's terrible. Not necessarily why the kill itself is that great, though his opening was really good at painting that too. I'm going to go very slightly with Shawn. We will go to Maggie on this one.
No. I don't want to choose. I think I am going to agree with Koho and give the point to Shawn, only because I know that the abandoning the grandchildren is like an important point, but I don't think it necessarily makes it the best kill. It just happens to be like a thing that happened before the kill. And Shawn's description of, it just keeps going. She's with the pterodactyls or pterodons or whatever they're called, and then the mosasaurus and everything. So I think I'm going to give the point to Shawn.
All right, well, with that, and your winner, Shawn, not this time, McKee, pulling off the win, but defending it from a come-from-behind performance from Ryan Payne. Great fight by those two. Jay, you didn't get to give your point. Where would you have gone and why, very, very quickly?
So now that I don't actually have to give a really good point, I'm going to give you my zany point. It's this lady is just ultimately terrible and deserves to die versus Are You Smoking Crack? Unfortunately, Are You Smoking Crack just didn't hit hard enough, and that lady is terrible. But no, I would have given it to Shawn. He just minusculely, you're right. He painted the picture just a little bit better, and sometimes you do bait your opponent into going off topic, and I think he did that really well. And unfortunately, it just happens like that sometimes.
Absolutely. With that, we will go to our winner today, Shawn McKee. You pulled off the win. Strong first 2 rounds. Were you nervous after you lost the community in the first speed round? When you got to the last one, pulled it out. How are you feeling right now?
I'm feeling really good. I didn't think I was going to win. I felt pretty good about Star Wars because Star Wars is my bread and butter. I'll tell you guys now, I have never seen either of the other 2 Star Trek movies. So I've only ever seen the 2 new ones, not the third one. So I thought for sure I was going to lose that one. And then the community one, I mean, that was just, I wish Tom and Ryan both could have gotten points for that because everything was fantastic there. As soon as I said Shazam, I remembered the post-credits scene. And I am going to say now, after I didn't fight for it, I think I should have been allowed to do it. But it's fair. He is in the post-credits scene. And I feel I'm very happy, obviously. I'm very happy that I got to do my first match against both of you guys because you guys were fantastic. And I couldn't have asked for better opponents.
Absolutely. So you have pulled off the win. We're going to go ahead and ask you one last question before we move on. Is there anyone you want to face now that you have a win on your record?
I'll face whoever I can. I just want to keep playing.
That is a very wholesome answer. I appreciate it. We're going to go over to our second place finisher, Ryan Payne. That comeback that you pulled, once you won the community point, did you think you had a shot to stay in it? How do you feel?
I pretty much community is where I was putting all my eggs in my basket. I am a big Star Wars fan. I love Return of the Jedi. I did not want to choose it. I mean, I could have chosen The Force Awakens before, but I just thought when it came down to the films they selected, both of them being first installments in a new trilogy, I decided to just choose one that I thought should have closed the trilogy out with a more sharper tone, but that's in retrospect. But Star Trek, yeah, that one was tough because the moment Tom said the Voyage Home, I knew I was going to be in trouble here. But I was surprised how Shawn was able to really argue with Star Trek. So community was where I was putting everything down. I had to come in, punch hard, and punch fast. Otherwise, oh my God, this could have been a knockout victory, or I could not have been in the speed rounds. So yeah, I was completely terrified, 100% terrified, because season 1, I love it. I do rewatch season 2 more, but season 1 is when I want to go back and look at some of the best like setup jokes and even one of the more structured episodes in my mind.
Absolutely. You did a hell of a comeback victory. Despite not having the win on your record, I'm sure we'll see you again. Is there anyone you would like to play coming back to Nerdgasm in the future?
Well, one thing's for sure, whoever my future opponent is going to be, I'm not going to be as emotional and I'm not going to be bayed in what Shawn did. It's just because I know the actress who got killed is, oh God. It's just, I've watched Jurassic Park and there's more I could tear apart that film than that lady's death. I just thought it was overrated. God, but I guess when it comes down to it, just whoever want to fight, I really can't think of anybody. I mean, whoever I'm paired with next, or if I'm in a 3-man structure like this, I'm gonna come back this time with more like bullet points of my arguments, so I don't try to retread as much as I did.
All right. And Tom, you did not get a point today, but you did do a hell of a job fighting. How do you feel about your performance? And do you think you'll be back?
Well, it's funny that Ryan said that about Star Trek. That was my foothold. That was really the only one I saw. Well, once I lost that point, I'm like, oh crap, I'm getting shut out, aren't I? Because I didn't remember Jack from Community except for Remedial Chaos Theory. So when that question was asked, I'm like, what season was Remedial Chaos Theory? And then I just had to work backwards from there. So yeah, Star Trek was a hurt, but I know I didn't prepare as well as I should, and I kind of let my hate for the Abrams Trek get overcome me there. But yeah, it was fun. As far as who I want to face next, I don't know.
You played good, just it didn't quite go your way, but a great fight from all three of you. But that's going to do it for us. That has been Shawn, that has been Ryan, that has been Tom. Those have been my amazing last-minute guest debate judges, Maggie and Jay. I've been Caleb, and this has been Nerdgasm. We'll see you guys next week with another great fight. Maybe not next week, maybe it's the next week. I say that every time. This is just cut me off, Tim. Just cut me off.
Eventually.
Eventually.